In this tutorial, we'll be looking at the interface of Maya, and we'll be looking at how to render out Hardware 2.0, a basic image, and also just adjusting the lights so they look a bit softer and nicer. First of all, we'll look at the interface. So when you open up for the first time, you'll be treated to this layout. Now up the top here we've got workspace, and we've got different sort of workspaces that we can quickly access. The classic is what we're going to start with. Now if something changes and you want to get back to the original, so what you can do is go up to Window, Workspaces, Reset, Classic Default, like so. Okay, so in here we've got our main viewport, and inside here we've got a perspective camera looking at our XYZ grid inside the middle here. Notice that the grid itself is actually just on the X and the Z rather than the Y. Now if we want to see a now if we want to change our layout, we can click on the quad panel here, and we get to see the 4 different viewports. So we've got top, front, and side down the bottom here. Now a shortcut is if we press the spacebar while hovering over a particular viewport, we can zoom into that area. Notice if you hold down the spacebar, you get this sort of secret menu. Now this is all the menus that are available through the menus up the top here. So let's have a look at now that the menu structure. So we've got drop down menus up the top here, and these are called different menu sets. At the moment we've got the modeling menu set. We can change that to animation, rendering and so forth, but we'll keep it to modeling. When you do change these, you'll notice that everything after window changes, but before window stays the same. Underneath the drop down menus we've got this underneath the menus up the top here we've got this thing called a status line, and here we've got different shortcuts. We can snap to the grid or to points and so on. We can also access some of the rendering shortcuts, so we can just render out the current view inside there like so, and we can also access some other areas like the hyper shader, which is where we manage materials and shaders. Underneath that we've got this thing called the shelf, and the shelf is like icons to the menu items as well. So they're sort of clustered together into different groups. So at the moment we've got polygons, but we've also got curves and surfaces. So these are NURBS objects rather than polygon objects. We'll be working in polygon objects, and other things like in rendering we've got lights we can access through here and so forth, but we'll stick to polygons. Inside each of these 4 windows we have a window sort of menu, and in here we can change the rendering type, or we can even change the orientation. So we can go to an orthographic view, change this to an orthographic view, or we can go to a perspective view. We can even create a new perspective view from here, or we can even change the panel to be, say, the graph editor or the hypershader, as we sort of pointed out before. Underneath these little icons refer to some of the options within here as well. So I'll just quickly create a box inside here. If I press F on the keyboard, it focuses in on the object, and at the moment it's in shaded mode. If I click on this icon here, I get the wireframe mode. This one here is shaded mode with plain shaded default shader, and this one's shaded with texture. We don't have any textures, and this one's shaded with light. We don't have any lights on at the moment, so we'll just turn that bit off. So the shortcuts for that is 4 on the keyboard, 5 for shaded mode, 6 for texture, and 7 for lighting. So we'll just go back to shaded mode, which is 5 on the keyboard. Now, so how I made the cube was just clicking on the cube icon up the top here. Now to navigate around the window, we hold down the Alt key and also the left mouse button, and we sort of tumble around. If we hold down the right mouse button, we sort of track in and out. We're moving the camera in and out. And the same with the wheelie if we scroll that. Now the other thing is though, if we hold down Alt and click the middle mouse button, in this case I've got like a two mouse button with a wheelie in the middle, and that's the middle mouse. If I click down on that, we can track where we're just moving side to side or up and down in our viewpoint. If we press A on the keyboard, we see all our objects in the scene, and as I said before, if we press F, then we see just that one object. Now, to select an object, we click on the object and we can come over here and see what is referred to as the channel box. And this is an abbreviation of some of the attributes associated to that object. In this case, our object is translated, so the position in world space at 0, and rotations at 0, and the scale is set at 1. No matter what size we made it, it would have been set at 1 because that's the default size. So if I create a new box, this time I'm going to double click on the icon here, and inside here I can say different sizes. So let's say 10 this time. And these are 10 world units. And we'll go create. And though I'll press F, even though it's a lot bigger, notice the scale is set to 1 because that's the initial scale that was created. So we can manipulate inside here by just typing in. So I can just type in 1 or 2, whatever it may be. I can also highlight a whole set and type in, and that will update all of those channels like so. Or I can actually click on the text and then middle mouse button drag, and that will create a virtual slider, which is kind of cool. So you can isolate a particular attribute and just manipulate the numbers inside of that. So I'll just zero all that out again and set all that back to 1, like so. So the channel box is an abbreviation of the attribute editor, and the attribute editor is here as well. So we can click on this little icon down the bottom. Now the shortcut to get between the attribute editor and the channel box is Control A. We can also access it through these icons up the top here. Okay, so what we also have in the channel box is this input node, and inside this input node is basically the same attributes as we got when we created our object or our create options basically. And so it's like a history, so every time you do something it will update, it will have another node or another section, and then we can sort of change the details inside here. So it's almost like going back in history and changing those. Okay, so underneath the channel box, when the channel box is open, not when the attribute editor, we've got our layers system. So this is like a display layers, and this means that we can add an object to a display layer. To do that, we can go to Layers, Create Empty Layer, and then select an object and right click on the layer and go Add Selected Object, and that'll add it to that particular layer. If I click on the V, it hides it. If I click on the T, this third one, it is a template, so it's just like a wireframe. And if I click the T again, it's like a rendered template. So which means basically I can't actually select it, but I can see it, and when it renders it will show up. So I'll just turn off the render. Now we've got a couple options, add new objects to current layer. So if you create a new object, it'll add it to that specific layer, but by default, it's not adding any new objects to that specific layer. So you have to add them manually. Underneath here is our animation timeline. So these are our different frames. We can extend the timeline. We can make it as long as we want and so forth. And if we press play, it shows us the animation that goes through the objects. At the moment, we don't have any keyframes. A quick way to make a keyframe is select the object, press S, and see how we've got red now on all those attributes. And then scroll to the last frame and say maybe change an attribute like say Y. I'll use the virtual slider, middle mouse dragging like so, and press S again, which is going to create an additional keyframe. So now we've got two keyframes, one here and one here. And when we press play, we'll get an animation between those keyframes. So I'll just delete those keyframes by selecting all the attributes and going down and break connections. And then it's broken the animation nodes associated to them. Also in here, we can actually scroll through the timeline. We can change this by clicking and dragging and so on. And we can just click into the timeline itself and drag the time slider. Down the bottom here, we've got sort of tips, and anything that goes wrong will come up here in red. Also, when you do an action, say create something, you'll get a script showing up in here. The script editor is this, can be accessed through this icon here, and this just lists all the things that you've done. So you can code straight into here using Python or MelScript, and you can actually see the code that's going on behind the scenes on what exactly you've done and what happens. So every time you do an action, and it gets displayed through this script editor. Over here, we've got our main tools, and we've got the quirky tools. So QWERT, or just R. And so what we've got here is our select tool. So if we click on that, we can click on an object and select it. If we have two objects, I'll just move one out of the way. If we have two objects in our scene and we want to select two things at once, we can either marquee select and select those, or we can click on one, shift, and click on the other one to select it as well. To move objects, like I just did, we use the move tool, and then we mainly click on the arrows to isolate the movement to that particular axis. Alternatively, if you use these boxes, it isolates to two of the axes at the same time. But you're better off just using the arrows. Underneath that, we've got our rotation. Similar idea, we can rotate via these loops or circles, or we can click on the outside and free rotate. That becomes a bit tricky, and again, it's best to isolate a particular axis and rotate from there. Scale is the third one, and if we click on the little boxes, we can scale it out to different sizes in those particular axes. In this case, if we click in the middle, we scale all the axes at the same time, or we can isolate two sections as well from here. So clicking the middle allows us to scale the whole object as a whole. Under here is the last tool activated. So this changes a lot. So at the moment it's on show manipulator tool, is from our create the polygon object. So we won't worry about that. We've also got the ability to marquee select using this tool, or paint select. Now when we've gone into paint select, it's gone into our component mode. So inside of Maya, we've got different component modes. So at the moment, what we're in is called object mode, and we can see it up the top here. And then inside here, we've got component mode. Now, to a shortcut to the different modes is right-clicking on the object, and then we've got object mode, face mode, or vertex mode. So object is the whole object, face is just the faces or quads in this case, or vertice is like the points, so these points that join up. So again, if we want to click 2 points, we can hold down shift and just little marquee select. We can move those 2 points like so. We've also got edge, so we can click on an edge and move that up and down like so. If we right click onto multi, we can select multiple attributes at the same time like so. So it's a quick way, but we'll just use it in object mode. To delete an object, make sure you're in object mode and just press delete. If you're in face mode, what can happen is it won't let you delete the last face. So you select the object and delete it. One thing that's really important with 3D modeling is the pivot point. So by default, the object has the pivot point in the center, and it rotates everything around that. Now, if we want to move the pivot point, the shortcut is D key, and then we can move the pivot point away, click D again, and now we're pivoting from that point there. Now, if we press D again, we can also select an attribute or a component, and it can snap to that. Press D again. Notice the orientation of it is to that vertice, but if we go back into object mode and then reselect it, it goes back to sort of world space. Each of these tools as well, if I double click on it, it brings up the tools of the object, and you can see axis rotation is set to object, but we can do it to component and world space and so forth. But we don't need to worry about that. Our move tool, we can reset it at any time by clicking up the top here, reset. And the other thing that's quite important at this stage is the soft select. So if I am in like face mode and press the B key by accident, and it's really easy to do because it's right next to the spacebar, is our object, as you can see, has, I'll do it with a sphere because it makes it more obvious. So here's a sphere. If I go into component mode, I'll select a object, a face, and notice the color. So that's actually this fall off color. And if I move that, you can sort of see it change in there. And so what it is a influence of fall off. So if I move one, it's slowly moving the other bits. So that's called soft select, like so. Just Z to undo. You don't need to hold down Command or Alt. So to turn off, so if your wireframe's gone yellow, it means you've got soft select on, and it's not going to work as you probably imagine. So to turn it off, press B on the keyboard or come down into the tool settings and unclick the tool there. So we'll go reset to the start, and it brings it back. So that's the same with all the manipulation tools, transform tools. Soft select, like so. All right, get back to our cube. And okay, so I'll just grab it, F to focus in. Now, underneath that, we've had a look at the the different layouts, these top ones, but there's another one here called Show Outliner, and the outliner is fantastic in regards to it shows you all the objects that are created in the scene. So now that I've done two cubes, I've got both those cubes there. We can come in here and rename them like so, and keep them organized and so forth. If we want to select a particular object, we can also come up here and select those objects. Now, if we want to group two objects together, we can do that by marking select, which I just dragged, but you can click one, shift, click another, and so you can see them both selected in there. And if we go up into edit, group, and notice the shortcut on the Mac is Command G or Control G on a PC. And when we group those together, you'll notice that we have our two objects and this extra node, which is the group node. And the group node's pivot point is orientated at the origin, which is at the center of the scene. So if I select the group and move it, I'm moving both objects, but I can still select each individual object and move them independently. If I want to select the top of the group, I select an object and press the up arrow key, and then I get the whole selection. You can actually edit this in the outliner. So if I want to move something out of a group, I can just middle mouse drag it and move it out, or middle mouse drag and drop it onto another node, and then it'll be parented to the node. So we call this a parent-child relationship or a hierarchy. And so the top of the group is the parent, and the child's underneath that. So the child follows the parent. Just a couple of things in the menu. Under Create, we can create our Polygon primitive shapes. Here are all our objects. Now, if we want to tear off any of these windows, this dotted line at the top allows us to tear off that window. And if we want to see any options for a tool, this box, if we click on the box, we see the options associated to that particular tool. By default, interactive creation is not turned on, but if you want to turn that on and you go cube, then you have to click, drag, and sort of, create your cubes that way. But we'll just turn it off like so. If you want to create a new camera, we've got our new camera create inside there as well, like so. And if I create a cube, if I want to make another cube exactly the same, edit, duplicate, or Command D. Like so. Here's my camera. If I want to look through my camera, I'll go up to perspective, and under perspective there's the camera that we've just created, and I can look through it. And then when I manipulate the world, I'm actually manipulating the camera itself. So I'll just quickly create like a little scene. So I'll first create a ground. I'll scale that up like so. I'll create a cube, scale it up, just move it up a little bit, and maybe I'll create another cube and then move it because it's duplicated exactly underneath, and scale it in a bit like so. And then if I hold down Shift D, it's going to duplicate and redo the transformation of that object, which is pretty cool, like so. So here I've got 3 cubes. I might even just duplicate this one and move it out like so, and give this a different color. So to give it a different color, I need to right click on the object, and I need to assign a new material. So I'll go to favorite materials, and we're using a Lambert, which is like a flat material. So I'll go Lambert, and that brings up the attribute editor. Inside the attribute editor, I can go to color, and I can change the color of that like so. Notice up the top here, I've got the show default material. If I tick that off, I can now see it like so. I'll go in and create a light now. So under create lights, I'm going to use a area light like so. Bring that up and rotate that around. And if I scale that up as well, like this, and move it around. If I want to move the light directly in the direction of how it's rotated, that's where we can go in and double click. So instead of, oh sorry, not rotation, but move. Instead of world axes, if I go to component, then I can move it back out like so. Now to see the light, what we need to do is turn on our light attribute there, and we can see that through there. And we can also turn on the shadow, which is the next one there, and we can see the shadow. Now the shadow is a bit dark in here, so if I go into shadow, I can actually turn the shadow intensity down like so. Now, to render this in Hardware 2.0, we first go into the render settings and make sure we're set to Hardware 2.0. And then we bring up the render window, render current frame, like so. And we make sure we're in hardware there as well, which we are. And we just render out from the camera. So if I go into render, I'll go render current camera A. And if I want to line that up, if I select an object and focus in on it and rotate it out and spin it back out, then I can sort of line it up nicely like so. I can even see the framing of the settings there like so. So the framing of the resolution is set inside common attributes under image size. So if I wanted to make it for 1K, I can do that inside there as well. So it's nice and square. So just bring up that window, render it out. To improve the render look and feel, what we can do is turn on anti-aliasing, which is this little icon here. And we can also turn on screen-based ambient occlusion. And so I'll render that out again, and we get sort of a bit more anti-aliasing and so forth. We can also make these shadows a little softer by coming in and selecting the area light itself. And if we use depth map shadows rather than ray trace preview shadows, which are down here, so we click on depth map shadows and we'll change the resolution. And I'll just say we can save this image by clicking on here, keep image, and then render that out. It gets a little softer, and we'll go filter size. There we go. And it softens out the shadows on the edge there. So one thing to note is that inside of Maya, we've got a linear color management workflow. So which means that we don't have a gamma correction of the normal sRGB that you see on most images. But from this viewpoint, we have got that gamma correction turned on. So you can see this little icon saying turned on. If we turn it off, this is like the natural state of the color without it being manipulated, which is more true to real values. But our screens, they require this sRGB so we can actually see it as if it's real. So we want to save this color managed image. To do that, we'll go save image, and in our options here, let's make sure we've got save color managed image. And I'll go snowman, save. doesn't matter. And then bring that image up. And we have our color managed version of it, like so. So that concludes the tutorial on looking at the software's interface, how to manipulate objects using transform tools, and how to set up some rendering using Hardware 2.0.